Hello, good friends, near and far, high and low. Today we will discuss console wars. Yes, video game console wars date back to the late 1970s. Starting with the second generation, you may be wondering, why not start with the first generation? And to that I say, that's a very good question. Anyway, the second generation of gaming consists of the Atari 2600 system, the Magnavox Odyssey. This war is self-explanatory. Just think which one sounds more familiar, and that one probably won. For those of you who don't have enough IQ to figure out which one, it was the Atari 2600. It sold around 30 million units, and the Magnavox Odyssey only sold around 2 million units. The reason for this is that the Atari 2600 came out a few years before the Odyssey. Therefore, most consumers ate up the 2600. Winner, Atari.
Hey, guess I win.
The third generation of gaming began after the infamous video game crash of 1983, which caused the gaming stock market to drop to a level so low, even the devil would say, ooh, that's harsh. However, one nearly 100-year-old playing card manufacturing company would rise from the ashes of the game crash of 83 and prove dominant. This would be Nintendo, who in 1985 created their masterpiece, the Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES swept the competition, selling about 62 million units. You may be wondering, was there any competition? The answer to that question was yes. The NES's main competitors were the Sega Master System and the Atari 5800. Sega Master System was a decent console, but it didn't hold as much power as the NES. Plus, the NES came first, making it hard for any competition to catch up. The Master System sold around 13 million units. Last and probably least, we have the Atari 5800, which was almost the exact same thing as the 2600. It may have been more popular, but it was released in 1982, 1 year before the gaming crash. The 5800 sold only around 1 million units. Winner, Nintendo.
I got a whip, so I'm gonna win this console war again. Oh, that's nice.
I win!
Yeah! Yeah! The fourth generation of gaming was where the competitive nature between Nintendo and Sega really set ablaze. Sega came in after learning their flaws with the Master System and created the Sega Genesis. The Genesis launched in 1988 with all new enhanced 16-bit graphics. For those of you who don't know what graphics are, it is the aesthetic quality of a game, or in dumb words, it's how good it looks. And the Genesis doubled the graphical quality of the previous consoles. All previous consoles to this point were all 8-bit. This is not to say that Nintendo didn't retaliate. In 1990, Nintendo released the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, also a 16-bit console, and boy oh boy, from that point forward, the competition was fierce. Nintendo and Sega threw out game after game trying to gain the upper hand, and it stayed that way until about 1991 when Sega made the mistake of trying to go further than 16-bit and created a hardware add-on called the Sega CD, which usually consisted of poorly made point-and-click games. In 1994, Sega created another hardware add-on called the Sega 32X. The 32X was made to be able to run 32-bit games, which if you can't do simple math, that's twice as much as the original Genesis could. The 32X was a complete disaster, as it could not run games properly and could even cause damage to the Genesis. In the end, the Genesis sold around 31 million units. By this time, the Super Nintendo had surpassed the Genesis by selling around 49 million units, thus being the victor. Wait, I forgot. There was another Atari system, the Atari 7200. I think that the only thing that must be stated is that it was years behind competition, as it could still only run 8-bit games. Thus, it only sold slightly above 150,000 units. Winner, Nintendo. As the mid to late 90s came around, Nintendo teamed up with a young new company called Sony. Nintendo had planned on making a CD add-on, kind of like the Sega CD. However, Nintendo abandoned this idea near its finish, thus leaving Sony to rot. But Sony rose from the ashes and created the Sony PlayStation. It was originally meant to be the Nintendo PlayStation, but ironically, Nintendo inadvertently created one of their most fiercest rivals. This isn't to say Nintendo did nothing. In fact, far from it. They created the Nintendo 64, which meant it now could run 64-bit games, 4 times the graphical capability as a previous console. Sega was trying to rebuild from the failure of the 32X by releasing a 32-bit console called the Sega Saturn. The Sega Saturn was well manufactured, it ran well, and even had a decent library of games. However, the Saturn was extremely weak in the advertising department, therefore losing most consumer interest. The Sega Saturn sold around 9 million units. If you were thinking the war was mostly competitive between Sony and Nintendo, then you would be wrong. Despite Nintendo being the previous 2-time champions, the Sony PlayStation sold around 3 times as many units as the Nintendo 64. Sony won with dominance by selling around 102 million units, and the Nintendo 64 only selling around 33 million units. Winner, Sony.
PlayStation. Screw you.
I guess I'll have to do my own thing now. We done struck gold.
Surprisingly, with the lack of success of the Saturn, Sega decided that they would create one more home console, and unless it blew the competition out of the water, Sega would have to be forced to stop making home consoles. Sega released the Dreamcast in late 1999. Like the Saturn, the Dreamcast was a good console with a decent library of games, but lacked the sales due to an upcoming console that blew all competition away. The Dreamcast sold around 9 million units, and Sega would retire from making home consoles. After the major success of the PlayStation, Sony would be crazy to not make a follow-up console to it, so in the year 2000, Sony released the PlayStation 2, and sales blew up like an atom bomb in 1945. The PlayStation 2 sold 155 million units. That's more units sold than any home console made before. You may be wondering why the PlayStation 2 was so incredibly successful. Well, let me explain. The PlayStation 2 had a built-in DVD player. Nowadays, that doesn't sound that impressive, but at the time, the cheapest DVD player would have been at least $600. The PlayStation 2 had a launch price of $300. So you could imagine a child trying to convince their parents to buy one for them. All they would have to say is that it could play DVDs. Thus make the PlayStation 2 a family home console. Now you might be wondering, does Nintendo still exist in all this? And the answer is yes. In 2001, Nintendo released the GameCube. Really, all that needs to be said about the GameCube was that it was a standard gaming console. It used small discs called microdiscs instead of using game CDs like the PlayStation, Dreamcast, and Xbox. Since the GameCube used microdiscs, it could not play DVDs. The GameCube sold about 22 million units. In 2001, a mostly unknown company came to the video game market, a company known as Microsoft. They created their brand new original console called the Xbox. The Xbox was more successful than the GameCube and created better console exclusive games than the PlayStation 2. One game such as Halo Combat Evolved. The Xbox could have the ability to play DVDs, but it required a hardware add-on. Xbox sold around 24 million units. Winner, Sony.
I'm Microsoft, and I came out with a product called Xbox, so I'm going to join in.
Get out of my way!
Wow, that was really rude. I wonder if that...
As the 7th generation of home consoles rolled around, Nintendo finally seemed to realize they were not the king of gaming anymore. Instead of investing in a more powerful system like Sony and Microsoft were doing, Nintendo aimed at a more family-friendly audience, what we gamers like to call casuals. Like stated before, Nintendo did not invest in a more powerful system, but instead invested into something that had been attempted before but never truly exceeded: motion controls. Thus, the Nintendo Wii was born. The Wii was released in 2006 and was met with mass success. Sure, it may have not been as successful as the PlayStation 2, but this is the first time a Nintendo console had exceeded 100 million units sold. Now you may be wondering how bad that is, or if that's bad at all. Well, the Nintendo Wii had a launch price of $250. You may be thinking, well, you said earlier that the Wii was far less powerful than the other consoles of that generation. And yes, you're right. But the Xbox 360 was slightly more powerful than the PlayStation 3, and that sold for only $300. That's $100 less, for those of you who don't know how to subtract. For their greediness, Sony and the PlayStation 3 suffered early on. However, this does not mean that the PlayStation 3 was a failure. In the latter half of its life cycle, Sony changed their attitude by reducing the PS3's price down to $300. You may be wondering how the PS3 would be able to catch up, considering the Xbox 360 launched at $300. Though the 360 got a head start and was a more powerful system, it had one major flaw: the red ring of death. For those of you who do not know the red ring of death is, the power button would usually be colored green in a 4-4 circle. If your system had the red ring of death, it would glow red and the circle would be in a 3-4. What the red ring meant was that your 360 had complete hardware failure. Now you may be thinking that this may not have been all that bad, but it was recorded that about 54% of the original Xbox 360 units sold had a hardware failure. Microsoft's response to this was foul. Instead of trying to find out what caused this issue and trying to fix it, they released a new model of the Xbox 360. Those who got the red ring of death were given no discount. So Microsoft was practically saying, yeah, we know that this is our fault, but if you want it fixed, then you got to buy a new one. The PS3 came very close to tying the 360, but came up just short. The PlayStation 3 sold just short of 84 million units, while the Xbox 360 sold just above 84 million units. Winner, Nintendo. We have finally reached our current generation, but this generation might be a little confusing. Let me explain. In this generation, we will be covering the Nintendo Wii U, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. You're probably wondering, why are there two Nintendo consoles in the same generation? Well, let me explain. In late 2012, Nintendo released a supposed successor to the Wii U. Like the console before it, the Wii U was going to attempt to try doing something new. It created the idea of a gamepad, a gaming tablet that connected to a disk drive, which planted the idea of a mix between home console and handheld portable. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that sounds quite awesome. However, the way Nintendo executed this was bad. The gamepad could only be a certain distance away from the disk drive, or else it would stop working. Nintendo had deliberately made it this way in case of a situation like if someone else in your house wanted to use the TV your Wii U is connected to, so you could just switch from TV mode to gamepad mode and play the game on the gamepad. This gimmick just didn't work for consumers, as the Wii U started with a decent sales, but then after the holiday season of 2012, the sales became almost non-existent. The Wii U sold around 13 million units. Sony had learned their lesson to not be greedy after a very rough start to the PlayStation 3. So now it's Microsoft's turn to be greedy. Microsoft showed off their supposed successor to the Xbox 360, the Xbox One. The Xbox One was met with a lot of hate when it was first announced. Microsoft stated that the Xbox One would always have to be connected to the internet, and if it did not connect to the internet within 24 hours, then the system would break. Microsoft also stated that the Xbox One would not support used games. thus meaning if a game had been played at all on another Xbox One system at any point in time, then it would not work on another Xbox One system. There's no doubt that this was an extremely greedy move by Microsoft. Don't worry, Microsoft certainly paid for it. Despite Microsoft giving the Xbox One the ability to play used games and not needing to be connected to the internet, the damage had already been done. The Xbox One had an incredibly slow start. Nowadays, the system has sold around 39 million units, less than half what the Xbox 360 sold. The PlayStation 4 was a completely different story than the Xbox One. After the struggle that was the PlayStation 3, Sony had learned from their mistakes to not be greedy, unlike Microsoft. In fact, after Sony had seen what Microsoft was attempting to do, they went in and trolled them to kingdom come, saying things like the PS4 can do incredible things like play used games and play games offline. Ooh. The only thing that can be seen negatively with Sony and the PS4 is that it required a paywall of $60 to play online, which is the same as what Microsoft was doing. This is truly a shame, considering the PlayStation 3's online play required no such thing. As of now, the PlayStation 4 has sold around 86 million units, surpassing the PlayStation 3's 84 million units. And our final console we have on today's show is the Nintendo Switch, released in March of 2017. The Nintendo Switch was supposed everything the Wii U wasn't. This time, the console is fully portable and does not have to be connected to a disk drive, as the Switch uses game cards, or cartridges. That is the only system instead of required another piece of hardware, such as the Wii U's disk drive. Instead of coming with a disk drive, the Nintendo Switch came with a console dock. With the dock, one would be able to slide the system in it and play it on their TV, thus making a handheld into a home console, or the other way around, depending on one's preference. It's extremely unlikely the Switch will come even close to surpassing the PS4, but there is certainly a chance that it will catch up to the Xbox One. As of now, the Nintendo Switch has sold close to 23 million units. A projected winner would probably be Sony, no doubt. Well, that's all we have time for today. Tune in for next time we have a very special guest.